Rain pelted the empty parking lot as Grace Thompson locked up the small roadside diner. The neon sign in the window flickered off, plunging the street corner into darkness save for the hazy glow of streetlights on wet asphalt. It was well past her 6-year-old son's bedtime. Grace hurried, feet splashing through puddles, pulling little Oliver along by the hand. The boy was bundled in a worn jacket, half asleep and shivering. "Mommy, I'm sleepy," he mumbled, rubbing his eyes. "I know, baby. We're going home now," Grace assured him. She lifted Oliver into the back seat of her aging sedan, tucking a threadbare blanket around him. A wave of exhaustion and guilt washed over her. Another long night where Oliver had been shuffled between babysitters and the diner's back booth. Being a single mother wasn't what she'd planned, but life rarely cared for plans. Grace started the engine. The old car groaned, but eventually sputtered to life. As she pulled onto the slick highway, rain hammered the windshield and the wipers barely kept up. She gripped the wheel with white-knuckled focus, silently urging the car to hold together a little longer. "Just get us home," she prayed. Her mind churned with worries as she drove through the storm. Tonight's tips were pitifully small, barely enough for the electric bill, let alone next week's rent. She bit her lip, thinking of ways to make ends meet. "We'll get through this," she whispered, stealing a glance at Oliver's sleeping face in the rearview mirror. For him, she would endure anything. Lightning flashed, illuminating the road ahead. In that brief glare, Grace saw a pair of hazard lights blinking on the shoulder. A sleek black car was pulled over, driver's door open. Her heart skipped. It was late, and this stretch of road was lonely. Common sense urged her to keep driving. She had her child to think of, but she remembered the helplessness of being stranded herself. She couldn't just leave someone if they were in trouble. Grace eased her car over and stopped a short distance ahead of the vehicle. Leaving the engine running for Oliver, she grabbed an umbrella and small flashlight from the glove box. The wind nearly tore the umbrella from her hand as she stepped out into the downpour. Rain battered her shoulders, and thunder rumbled overhead while she cautiously approached the stalled car. "Hello," she shouted over the storm, shining her flashlight. "Do you need help?" A figure emerged from beside the car, a tall man in a drenched suit, his dark hair plastered to his forehead. He looked up, startled, and nodded. "The engine just died," he called back, raising his voice to be heard. "I was about to call for a tow, but I don't have a signal here." Grace came closer, her flashlight revealing a face that appeared to be in his mid-30s, with sharp, refined features. Despite the situation, he carried himself with an air of calm. Still, she caught a flicker of frustration and worry in his eyes. "Pop the hood," Grace said, offering him a faint, encouraging smile. "Maybe it's something I can help with. I know a bit about old cars." Surprise flashed across the man's face, but he complied. As steam billowed from under the hood, Grace held the umbrella over both of them. A sharp burnt smell hit her nose. In the flashlight beam, she spotted a burst coolant hose, fluid dripping onto the engine block. "I see the problem," she said loudly. "A hose blew. Your engine overheated." Rainwater trickled down her neck as she pointed. "Do you have any water? We might top off the coolant enough to get you off the highway." "I think so." "1 second," the man replied. He returned with 2 half-empty water bottles from his car. Together, they carefully poured them into the coolant reservoir. On Grace's instruction, he tried the ignition. The engine turned over and rumbled weakly to life. A relieved grin broke on his face as he rejoined her. "That did it, at least for now. Thank you." "Grace," she introduced herself. "Grace," he repeated, as if the name were something important. "I'm Alexander. I truly appreciate this. Not many people would stop in weather like this." She shrugged, managing a smile. "I couldn't just leave you out here." Just then, a faint cry came from Grace's car up ahead. Oliver had woken. Grace's chest tightened. She'd left him alone longer than she intended. "My son," she explained quickly, already moving. Alexander followed her through the rain. Oliver's wide, tearful eyes met Grace as she opened the back door. "Mommy, I was scared," he sniffled. "I'm here, honey," she soothed, lifting him into her arms despite getting his pajamas damp. "I'm sorry. I was helping this man with his car." Alexander stood a couple steps away, holding the umbrella over them all. "Hi there, Oliver," he said gently. "Your mom helped me a lot. You should be proud of her." Oliver peered at the stranger, calming a bit at Alexander's kind tone. The little boy nodded and mumbled, "Mommy's really smart." Grace laughed softly, relief flooding her. Even Alexander let out a small chuckle, a warm smile briefly lighting his tired face. A crack of thunder made Oliver yelp and burrow into Grace's shoulder. The storm wasn't relenting, and Grace suddenly remembered her own car's state. She bit her lip and placed Oliver back in his seat. "Let's get you warm, baby." She tried to start the engine again, but this time it only gave a feeble click. A surge of panic hit her. "Not now. Not here." Alexander noticed. "Car trouble." Grace's voice shook. "I think my battery's dead." Without missing a beat, Alexander said, "Get in my car. I'll drive you two home. You can't stay out here." Grace hesitated. Accepting help didn't come easily. She was used to fending for herself. But one look at Oliver's trembling form and the raging storm decided it. "Thank you," she said, already grabbing her bag and Oliver's blanket. Moments later, Grace and Oliver were bundled in Alexander's warm sedan, the smell of leather and Alexander's subtle cologne surrounding them. Oliver curled up, quickly dozing off again under the blanket. Grace sat in the back beside her son, still damp and shivering, as Alexander navigated through sheets of rain. She gave him directions to her apartment, apologizing for the inconvenience. "I'm sure this isn't how you plan to spend your night," she murmured. Alexander caught her gaze in the rearview mirror. "Don't apologize. If anything, I'm grateful I can return the favor after what you did." They fell into a comfortable silence. Grace found herself studying Alexander's profile as he drove. The strong jaw, the focused eyes softened by concern whenever he glanced back at Oliver. There was a stillness about him now, a quiet far cry from the frustration he'd shown on the roadside. Who was this man who appeared wealthy and polished, yet didn't hesitate to help a stranded mother and child? Soon, they reached Grace's apartment complex, a rundown building with chipped paint and flickering porch lights. Alexander insisted on walking them to their door, holding the umbrella over Grace as she carried the sleeping boy in her arms. Water pooled at their feet on the dimly lit porch. "You're going to catch cold," Grace scolded lightly, noticing Alexander was half soaked again from ensuring she and Oliver stay dry. He offered a faint smile. "I'll survive." Inside the apartment, Grace flicked on a lamp, casting a soft glow over the small living room cluttered with Oliver's toys and coloring books. Embarrassed by the mess, she turned to Alexander. I wish I could offer you something warm to drink, or a towel." Alexander shook his head. "Please, don't worry about it. I'm just glad you and Oliver are safe." His eyes drifted to the child in her arms. Oliver had stirred a little, blinking drowsily at Alexander. "Are you leaving?" the boy asked in a tiny voice. Alexander's expression softened. "I am, old man. But it was very nice to meet you." Oliver offered a sleepy smile. "Thanks for helping my mommy." Something tender flashed in Alexander's eyes. "Thank you for sharing your mom with me when I needed help," he replied. Grace's throat tightened with emotion at that. She gently bounced Oliver, who laid his head on her shoulder again. "We should let Mr. Alexander go home now, sweetheart." She walked Alexander back to the door. Rain still drummed outside. They lingered for a moment on the threshold. Grace found herself reluctant to part from this kind stranger who felt oddly like a friend after all they'd been through tonight. "I can't thank you enough," she said softly. "For everything." Alexander ran a hand through his damp hair, a bashful gesture. "You don't owe me any thanks. If you hadn't stopped, I'd have been stuck out there all night. I'm glad I could return the favor." He paused, then added, "It was nice meeting you, Grace." "You too, Alexander." He gave a parting nod and stepped out into the rain. As he walked back to his car, Grace watched him through the open door. In the quick flashes of lightning, she saw him standing by his car for a moment, looking back at her door before he finally drove off into the stormy night. After closing and locking the door, Grace put Oliver to bed and changed into dry clothes. Exhaustion began to weigh on her, but her mind kept drifting to Alexander, his gentle smile, the haunted sadness she'd glimpsed just beneath his polite exterior. She wondered what sorrows a man like him carried. Curling up in her own bed, Grace allowed herself a small, hopeful thought. Perhaps fate might let their paths cross again. It seemed unlikely in a city so large, but still, as she listened to the rain easing into a soft patter, she found herself whispering, Maybe we'll see him again someday. Outside, the storm was finally gentling, and somewhere across town, a solitary man drove toward home, equally lost in thoughts of a brave woman and her little boy who had appeared like a miracle on a dark, stormy road. The next morning, after a night of little sleep, Alexander found a small stuffed dog wedged in the back seat of his car, a toy he remembered Oliver clutching the night before. Without hesitation, he decided to return it. By mid-morning, the storm had passed, and Alexander arrived at Grace's apartment, the toy in hand. Grace was astonished to see him at her door. Oliver's face lit up when he saw Mr. Whiskers, the stuffed dog, and he threw his arms around Alexander in an impulsive hug of gratitude. The simple trust and affection from the child warmed Alexander in a way he hadn't felt in years. Grace invited Alexander in for a cup of coffee, which soon turned into lingering over a modest breakfast together. In the cozy glow of the small kitchen, they talked as if old friends. Grace opened up about life as a single mother, how Oliver's father had left, and how she managed each day working long hours at the diner. In turn, Alexander spoke quietly of his own life. He revealed that he'd lost his wife and young daughter in an accident 3 years ago, a confession that brought tears to Grace's eyes and prompted her to reach across the table to squeeze his hand in sympathy. Alexander felt a strange sense of relief telling her, as if sharing this burden aloud eased it slightly. When Grace mentioned worrying about her broken-down car, Alexander didn't hesitate. He phoned a friend who owned a garage and arranged for her car to be towed and repaired right away. Grace protested at first. She couldn't possibly afford the likely expensive fix, but Alexander gently insisted, covering the cost as repayment for her kindness to him. Overwhelmed, Grace wiped away tears and thanked him, and Alexander only shook his head, saying it was the least he could do. They spent the rest of the morning talking and laughing softly so as not to disturb Oliver, who was busy coloring nearby. By the time Alexander rose to leave, a genuine bond had formed between them. At the door, Grace thanked him again, not just for the car, but for everything. "You have a good heart, Alexander," she said softly. He felt something stir in his chest at her words. "I'm glad I met you, Grace," he replied. There was a warmth in his eyes that made her heart flutter. Oliver clung to Alexander's legs, asking innocently, "Will you come back, Mr. Alex?" Alexander crouched down with a smile. "You'll see me tomorrow, Oliver. I'll bring your car back all fixed up. Okay." With that promise, and with smiles all around, Alexander departed. As Grace closed the door, she realized her apartment, once so lonely, now felt a little emptier in his absence. She found herself already looking forward to the next day, heart buoyed by a hope she hadn't felt in a long time. True to his word, Alexander returned the next day with Grace's car freshly repaired and running like a dream. Grace nearly cried with gratitude as she took the keys from him, and she insisted he stay for a batch of homemade muffins as thanks. The exchange of the car became another easy, friendly visit, one that ended with warm smiles and a promise to keep in touch. They traded phone numbers, and from that day forward, Alexander and Grace spoke or texted nearly every day. Over the weeks that followed, what had begun as an unlikely friendship deepened into something more profound. Alexander found reasons to stop by the diner during Grace's shifts, becoming a familiar face in her otherwise hectic life. Sometimes he'd simply have a cup of coffee and read a newspaper at the counter during her slow hours, offering her a friendly ear or a witty comment that made her laugh. Other times, he'd arrive at her apartment on a Saturday morning with fresh groceries, insisting he had accidentally overbought at the farmer's market. Grace knew better. He just wanted to make sure she and Oliver had plenty to eat. But she accepted the gifts with a gracious smile and often turned them into shared meals for all three of them. For Oliver, Alexander's presence quickly became a source of pure joy. The little boy would light up at the mere mention of Alex's name. Alexander, in turn, seemed to rediscover his own inner child in Oliver's company. He took Oliver to the park to fly a kite on a breezy afternoon, both of them laughing as the wind nearly carried the kite and Oliver away. He helped him learn to ride a bicycle without training wheels, jogging alongside and cheering as Oliver wobbled down the sidewalk on his own for the first time. Grace watched these moments from a distance, her heart full. It was beautiful and bittersweet to see her son experience a fatherly figure's guidance. a role she never thought would be filled. And it was equally heartwarming to watch Alexander's guarded demeanor soften in the glow of Oliver's infectious enthusiasm. As the trio spent more time together, an unspoken bond formed, a semblance of family that both Grace and Alexander had thought lost to them. Grace found herself opening up about her small hopes and big fears late one evening when Alexander stayed for dinner. After Oliver had fallen asleep on the couch, they sat on the balcony of her apartment, talking quietly under the stars. She confessed how every night she fretted over making rent, how she worried she wasn't giving Oliver the childhood he deserved. Alexander listened intently, then gently told her that she was the best mother Oliver could ever have, that the love and safety she provided meant more than any material luxuries. His words moved her to tears, and he had reached out, brushing away a tear on her cheek with his thumb in a gesture so tender it made her breath hitch. In that charged moment, with his hand lingering against her skin and the night air thick with unspoken feelings, they had both fallen silent. Alexander's eyes drifted to her lips, just for a fraction of a second, before he pulled back, clearing his throat and looking away with a mix of yearning and hesitation. Grace's heart pounded. She knew they were teetering on the edge of something deeper than friendship, but she also sensed his fear. Alexander, for all the happiness he'd found with Grace and Oliver, still struggled with guilt and trepidation. The more he cared for them, the more he felt the ghost of his past whisper that he had no right to a second chance. That opening his heart again was a betrayal to the family he lost, or worse, an invitation for pain to strike once more. Those fears made him hold back each time he found himself wanting to pull Grace into his arms, or when he imagined what it would be like to hear Oliver call him Dad. It was on a sunny Sunday afternoon, about 2 months after the stormy night that brought them together, when those fears and hopes collided with reality. Alexander had invited Grace and Oliver to spend the day at a nearby lakeside fair, a casual outing that felt thrillingly like a family trip. They rode the Ferris wheel, with Oliver insisting on sitting between them and squealing in delight at the view from the top. They shared kettle corn and caramel apples, and Alexander won Oliver a giant stuffed bear at a game booth, drawing applause from the boy and a beaming smile from Grace. It was the kind of day Alexander hadn't dared dream of having again, filled with simple, precious moments of joy. As the afternoon sun cast golden hues over the lake, the three of them rested on a picnic blanket near the water's edge. Oliver was drowsy from the excitement and curled up with his new teddy bear, while Grace and Alexander sat close, shoulders occasionally brushing as they talked quietly. It felt natural, comfortable, and right. Grace, basking in the peaceful moment, turned to Alexander. His face was relaxed, eyes on the shimmering water. She took a chance and gently rested her head on his shoulder. He tensed for half a second. Then, with a soft exhale, he eased and leaned his head against hers. Grace's heart swelled. In that silent closeness, she felt how far they'd come, and how much she wanted this man to stay in her life for good. MMH. Mommy, came Oliver's sleepy voice. The little boy sat up, rubbing his eyes. He looked at Grace leaning on Alexander and gave a small, knowing smile. Then he turned his gaze to Alexander and spoke the words that would shake the walls around Alexander's heart. Daddy, can we come back here again? Oliver asked softly, still half in a dream as he hugged the teddy bear. Grace's breath caught, and she lifted her head, cheeks flushing. Oliver, she began gently, unsure how Alexander would react. She had never encouraged her son to call Alexander anything but his name. This came straight from Oliver's own heart. Alexander's entire body went rigid. He stared at Oliver, eyes wide, and for a moment he seemed frozen in time. Grace could see a tempest of emotion in his expression. Shock, pain, longing, and fear all at once. Oliver, now more awake, realized something was wrong. His bottom lip trembled. I'm sorry," he whimpered, looking between his mother and Alexander. "I didn't mean to be bad." Grace immediately pulled Oliver into her lap, wrapping her arms around him. "Oh, baby, you're not bad at all," she whispered, kissing his temple. "You just said something that surprised us." She glanced up at Alexander. He had stood up, turning away toward the lake. One hand was pressed to his mouth, as if to hold in whatever he was feeling. His shoulders shook, whether from anger, sorrow, or something else, Grace couldn't tell. Keeping her voice calm for Oliver's sake, Grace said, "Why don't you go see if there are any ducks on the water, honey? We still have a bit of popcorn left to feed them." Oliver sniffled, clutching his teddy. "Okay," he murmured, and shuffled a few yards away to the water's edge, casting worried glances over his shoulder. Grace got to her feet and approached Alexander, whose back was still turned. She gently touched his arm. "Alexander." He took a sharp breath, but didn't face her. "I'm sorry," he managed in a strained voice. "I didn't expect that." "I know," Grace said softly. She moved around to stand in front of him. Alexander's eyes were wet, and it looked like it was taking all his effort to keep composure. "He didn't mean any harm," she continued. "He's just a little boy who loves you." Alexander closed his eyes, a tear escaping down his cheek. "Grace," he whispered, voice raw. I'm not his father. I can't be. I tried. I thought maybe I could fill that space, but..." He shook his head, swallowing hard. Hearing him say that, it terrified me. "I'm sorry." Grace's heart ached. She reached up and gently wiped the tear from his face, her hand lingering against his cheek. "I understand," she murmured. "And you're not his father. Not by blood. He knows that. He feels safe and loved with you. So do I." Alexander opened his eyes at that, gazing at her through a blur of emotion. Grace offered a trembling smile. "You have become so important to us. I didn't realize how much until this moment. But I don't want you to feel pressured or guilty. You've lost so much. I can't imagine how hard this is for you." He let out a shuddering sigh. "When he called me, his voice broke. For just a second, I felt so happy, like I had my family back. And then I remember it's not true. Rose is gone and I don't deserve to pretend." His face crumpled. "I'm scared, Grace. Scared of loving him, of loving you, and then losing you both. I wouldn't survive it." Grace's eyes filled with tears. She cupped his face between her hands. "Listen to me," she said, voice shaking but firm. "You're not going to lose us. I'm right here. Oliver is right here. We're safe, and we care about you so much." She had to pause to steady a sob at her throat. "I know you're scared. I am too. But we can't heal if we keep the door closed." Alexander covered her hands with his own, leaning into her touch. His eyes searched hers desperately. Behind them, Oliver's small voice called uncertainly, "Mommy? Are you and Alex okay?" Alexander and Grace both turned. Oliver stood a few steps away, clutching his popcorn bag, eyes red from crying. Alexander immediately wiped his face and tried to smile for the boy. Grace beckoned Oliver over, and he came hesitantly. Alexander went down on one knee, so he was eye level with Oliver. "Hey, buddy," he said gently. "Come here." Oliver shuffled closer. Alexander opened his arms, and Oliver flew into them, abandoning his popcorn. Alexander hugged the child tightly, resting his chin atop Oliver's curly head. Grace knelt beside them, wrapping her arms around both. "I'm sorry if I made you sad," Oliver said in a small voice against Alexander's shoulder. Alexander stroked the boy's hair. "You didn't do anything wrong," he murmured. "I was sad because I lost someone like you a long time ago, and I got scared. But that's my problem, not yours. You didn't do anything bad, Oliver." "Okay." Oliver pulled back to look at Alexander. "So, you're not mad I called you that?" Alexander managed a real smile this time, though his eyes were shining. "No, I'm not mad. In fact, it made me happy, more happy than I can say. I was just surprised." Oliver considered, then wrapped his arms around Alexander's neck again. "Okay," he said, sounding content. Grace let out the breath she'd been holding. She placed a hand on Alexander's shoulder, meeting his eyes. There was fear still, yes, but also a spark of hope. She nodded slightly, letting him know she was open to that conversation, open to a future together. In the golden light of that autumn day, Grace realized that the wish she'd murmured to herself on a stormy night had come true. Against all odds, their broken roads had led them straight to each other. And in each other, they had found home. The end.